Which founder died of alcoholism while his father was sitting president of the United States? Hi, founder fans. Jason here. Today's founder is Charles Adams. Now, Charles was the son of John Adams, who was a much more famous patriot. But Charles found opportunity because his father was sent to Paris to be a minister, first to France, and then to England and Netherlands and a whole bunch of European countries. And when he went over there, John Adams took two of his sons with him. John Quincy Adams, who was 12, and Charles Adams, who was 9 years old, because many of the wealthiest founders were educated and had their children educated in Europe. But the Adams family was from more of a middling background, so the opportunity to educate his sons in Europe, he simply could not pass up. So he did bring the children over to France, where they studied. Now, John Quincy Adams would study there for years. He would become a foreign diplomat and eventually be president of the United States himself. Charles's story is very much different. He missed the United States. He missed his mother back home. He didn't like it in Europe. So after just a year and a half, at 10 years old, he was sent back to the United States, essentially alone. I mean, he didn't pilot the ship by himself, but without really any adult he was very comfortable with. But he gets back home, and he's a very smart young man, and by 15 years old, he enters Harvard. Fortunately, this is where problems come in. He starts to drink heavily here. He becomes known to party and celebrate a little too much. Though he does graduate and he studies law, he gets a law degree. He studies for a little bit under Alexander Hamilton, and he does end up marrying and having some children, but unfortunately he decides to start speculating in land, which was common at the time, but he does a terrible job of it, and he goes into debt. He actually loses a lot of John Quincy's money trying to invest for him, and eventually Charles Adams is essentially destitute. Now, his family keep trying to get him to quit drinking because he suffered from alcoholism, it's pretty clear. And his family kept trying to get him to quit drinking, but they just couldn't. And eventually, John Adams ends up disowning his son. In 1798, while he's president of the United States, John Adams disowns Charles Adams. And he says, the delightful little fellow who he once said he loved too much was now, quote, a madman possessed by the devil. Because he could not be reined in. He could not take care of his family. And unfortunately, his drinking got so out of control that at just 30 years old, Charles Adams died from consuming too much alcohol. And this news came to John Adams just as he was learning he lost his bid to be reelected to a second term as president to Thomas Jefferson. So he was heartbroken, and he lost the embarrassing first person to lose the office after one term. It was not a good point in this man's life. And his opponent, Thomas Jefferson, they were still corresponding because Jefferson was just Adams' vice president, wrote his condolences. And Adams wrote back, and I'm going to quote this at length, and it's very sad, but I think it tells a lot about Charles Adams and John Adams and the early station of the Adams family in American politics. Because John wrote to Thomas Jefferson that he lost a son who was once the delight of my eyes and a darling of my heart, cut off in the flower of his days, amidst very flattering prospects, by causes which have been the greatest grief of my heart and deepest affliction of my life. And this is a man who put everything on the line for his country, who left his home and traveled the world for things that afflicted him, so to speak. And in his mind, the death of Charles was the greatest affliction of his life. So I'm not going to ask if you enjoyed that video. It's a little too sad for that, but I hope it inspired you to learn a little bit more about the Adams family at large. They're a very interesting set of characters. Please hit like if you enjoyed this video. I put out videos 5 days a week, and subscribe to get one of those 5 videos every day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a live video tomorrow.